Thank you for coming to my presentation. Today, I will be discussing how testers who are using a low-code tool can learn to adapt best practices developed by testers using more traditional frameworks. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, my background, and how this idea came about. I think in order to really make my point, I will need to dispel some of the misconceptions surrounding low-code testing. Then we will deep dive into some examples starting at a high level and working our way down to a specific best practice. I'm hoping afterwards we can do some Q&A. You may have already looked at my bio on SauceCon website, so some of this may be old news to you. But for those of you who haven't, welcome. My name is Evelyn Coleman, and I'm a technical project manager here at Sauce Labs, working on the brand new customer implementation team. I've been working with Sauce Labs for 4 years, and before this role, I had the pleasure of working with many of our current clients as a customer success manager and also as a solutions architect. If any of you are in the audience who worked with me before, hello. It's nice to see you again. Before all of this and before coming to work in tech in Austin, I was in the US Army working in air defense. My undergrad is in animal behavior from the Evergreen State College, go Gooey Ducks, and I live with my standard poodle named Andy. And big shout out to all of my Formula One fans here at SauceCon. All right, now that you know a little bit about me, I'll tell you how I came to my question and the idea behind the presentation. About a year ago, Sauce Labs acquired a low-code testing solution called Autonomic. I was a solutions architect at the time, and if you don't know what the solutions architects do here at Sauce Labs, they mainly help customers optimize their tests and adopt best practices so that they can meet their goals. I'm going to use the words high code to describe the types of tests that my teammates helped customers with. These are tests written with code using various libraries and frameworks and languages. I'm going to refer to tests authored using solutions like Autonomic as low code. These are the types of solutions that might employ click and record, natural language processing, or machine learning to help users author tests. When it came to figuring out how we could help our new low-code customers, opinions were varied. Some of us had previously had negative experiences with low-code, and all of us weren't really sure how to start developing best practices for this solution. But I'm going to let you in on a secret. I don't really know much about high-code testing, and I had no opinion either way about low-code testing. I had a completely different role on the team involving Sauce Connect, and when Sauce Connect started working with Autonomic, I was brought into the world of low-code testing. And that's when I realized the journeys that low-code testers were on sounded very familiar to a subset of Sauce Labs customers that I'd been watching my teammates help for a long time. We all know a lot gets thrown over the wall to manual testers. Since they're human and not robots, we think that naturally they should be able to see visual regressions, security, accessibility, and performance issues, all while performing their functional tests. If we want any kind of platform coverage, meaning testing on a few different browsers or operating systems, we understand that it'll take time to repeat all of those manual tests on different platforms. So it's only natural that at some point, these organizations look into automating their tests. And so far on this journey, I could be talking about organizations that bring in SDETs or automation engineers to solve their problems, or I could be talking about an organization that chooses to adopt low-code tests. My friends, this is not where the similarities stop. In both these cases, the next step is often to try and automate the manual tests, which it doesn't work that well because robots can do amazing things, humans can do amazing things, and those things are very different. I think for people who've had those bad experiences with low-code tools, this is where the journeys of high-code organizations and low-code organizations start to diverge. Because what happens next is that high-code testers are exposed to a world with best practices, and the solutions to their problems have been around for decades. They attend conferences like SauceCon, they go to meetups and read blogs, they get in fights on Twitter, all in a world that's catered to them to talk about how to get to their testing goals. Hopefully, if they belong to an organization that's serious about quality, they can bring those tests home, those best practices home, and apply them. Their tests get better and their skills improve. So I started to raise the point, why can't low-code testers just be a part of that and go on the same journey? When I raised this idea, to different people, we had some great discussions. From an outsider's perspective, it seems really silly to me that conversations around best practices didn't automatically apply to low-code testing too. Every day, I hear about how our low-code solution is adopting some new functionality, and those functionalities are bringing us in parity with the things you can achieve in high-code frameworks. From an outsider's perspective, it seems really silly to me that the conversations around best practices didn't automatically apply to low-code testing too. Every day, I seem to hear about our low-code solution adopting a new functionality, and some of those functionalities bring in more tools that can achieve the same nuanced solutions that high-code frameworks can. I bet that there are product managers outside of Sauce Labs too that are doing the same thing in their low-code testing solutions. In fact, most of the low-code solutions I've seen, including ours, can even execute code snippets or use traditional selectors to find elements. What I'm getting at is that things are merging. On the other side, in high code, I saw a test last year in Python that I thought was just comments. I literally didn't even realize I was looking at code because the functions were all written in such a way that it seemed like plain English. During our Q&A, I'd love to know if anyone else feels like this is the direction things are heading. In 10 years, maybe we won't even see a difference between high code and low code tests. I started to raise these ideas and questions to people around me, and I noticed that there was still some reluctance to dive into these topics. Mainly, there were a lot of misconceptions about low code and keeping low code testing out of the conversations about best practices. Let's start by just getting these misconceptions out of the way. I almost didn't make this slide because I think it's insulting to assume that someone who's using low-code tools doesn't have the technical chops to understand high-code best practices or to adopt them. In fact, I've personally worked with customers who were already high-code automators who chose to adopt a low-code testing tool instead because it was better for their application. I'd also like to point out that writing tests, no matter how easy your solution is to use, still exposes you to developers and engineers. No one who's getting started knows everything. You just get exposed a little bit at a time. I'm not even sure when best practice became synonymous with code example. A best practice should be an idea of how to do something the best way possible and some potential strategies for accomplishing this task. If there are code snippets you can borrow, even better. But that isn't the whole point. So anyways, this myth is debunked and we should move on. This myth is the biggest conversation killer that I've run into. Everyone seems to think that low-code solutions should just have all the best practices built right in, which means that there's no reason to teach low-code testers about best practices, not just the ones adapted from traditional frameworks, but no best practices should be taught at all. Let's take a minute to think about this. I can't think of a single piece of software or a machine in the entire world that has all the best practices built right in. On the right side of the screen, we see a picture of Andy Green, who set the world land speed record in 1997. Even though his vehicle was optimized for going very fast, I think it's safe to say, even without asking him, that his team developed some best practices. They may have had to choose different best practices depending on the weather that day or the ground conditions. I don't know, but no tool can be optimized for every scenario. We need to learn best practices from each other and try new things in order to accomplish this. All right, let's look at myth number 3. Low-code solutions do not offer enough functionality to adopt high-code best practices. That's a pretty good point. We may have covered some of this earlier as we talked about how low-code solutions can do new things every day. But looking at the functionality we have today, it's easy to recognize that there's still some things you can do with high-code testing to get around problems or write these beautifully elegant tests. High-code testers have so many libraries and code snippets and Stack Overflow examples right at their fingertips. It's easy to feel like the tools available in low-code solutions are inadequate, especially if our application under the test is complex. Sometimes I know I go to the home improvement store and see racks and racks of tools. When I have a problem, I think maybe it would be better to just have a contractor come and do it. After all, they have the right tools. I don't feel like I have the right experience for the job or everything I need to get it done. I forget that for most things in my house, they can be fixed with just a few simple tools and some YouTube. Again, I don't see this myth as a conversation stopper, but more as an excuse to get creative. Why not do what you can with the tools you have to accomplish as much as possible towards your goals? Now that we've cleared up those misconceptions about low-code testing, let's take a look about how we can adopt some high-code best practices for our low-code testing, starting with the big picture and working our way down. One of the things that my team helped high-code customers with was rethinking their overall testing strategy, helping organizations understand that you can't just take out your manual tests and replace them with automation and expect amazing results. The reason being that your software development lifecycle is like an ecosystem that's interconnected, and everyone expects the test to be conducted by humans. We might take for granted their ability to flag visual regressions and accessibility bugs without actually having written those instructions anywhere. Humans also don't need things like clear selectors to know which elements to click on, like robots do. Now that we have the ability to write automated tests, we should start thinking about this all the way through our life cycle. How can our application be developed in a way that optimizes our automation? And more specifically, how can our application be developed in a way that optimizes automated testing for the tools that we have available? There's a ton of best practices out there in blogs and in other sessions here at SauceCon to cover this, and I'm not going to go into detail about all of those options. My point is that understanding Java or Python is not a prerequisite for being a part of these discussions and adopting these lessons into your organization. The prerequisites are knowing that the test automation doesn't start after the feature is built, and communicating the limitations and capabilities of your low-code tool to the rest of your team. Low-code test organizations would benefit from thinking about their development lifecycle and automation strategy as the same thing. I've heard people say test automation is development, and this includes all test automation to me, even low-code. Let's take a look at an example one step closer. The next best practice we hear with high-code testing is that not everything that can be automated should be automated. This can mean a few different things. The first way that I look at this best practice is that now that you're automating, it would be a really good time to take a fresh look at your marketing and research. We should figure out what parts of our application are most used and which parts of our application are most important, and maybe prioritize those tests instead of just starting at the beginning of your big binder of tests. The sooner you can automate the important things, the quicker your organization will see the benefit of automation. Think about where you're going to start. Another way to think about not automating everything is that not everything has to be automated as a functional test. Testing is comprised of layers, and high-code testers are familiar with Mike Cohn's test pyramid. Mike and many great thinkers out there describe the idea that most of your tests should be unit tests. These are small and done by developers. The next biggest would be your service and integration tests. Finally, up at the top is your smallest group where you have your functional tests. Looking at our big binder of manual tests, it's possible that some of those tests in there might be better served by other people in our organization or a specific tool like an API testing tool. Functional tests can take up quite a bit of time to run, and writing faster functional tests takes time and skill. Automating functional tests, whether it's with low-code or high-code tools, isn't the silver bullet to speeding up your release cycle that some people think it is. But just like with my previous example, there's a ton of research already done on this topic to help you determine how to get that speed. People have suggested not only test pyramids, but upside down pyramids or ice cream cones, test diamonds, and I even saw a trophy and a rocket ship to describe how you should think about your automation while I was doing research for this presentation. What I didn't see was any evidence that these ideas wouldn't be just as important for low-code testers or just as applicable. Let's get even more granular. One of the best practices that everyone at Sauce Labs repeats until we are blue in the face is that tests should be short, autonomous, and atomic. These help keep down our troubleshooting and speed up our tests. It's pretty logical that the smaller tests are, the easier they might be to troubleshoot, and sometimes they may be less complicated, and less likely to break. If we want to gain speed through parallelization, our tests should also not depend on each other or any human interaction. We shouldn't have to stop an automated test and plug in a password. Likewise, we shouldn't have to rely on one test happening to set up for our next test. If we search online for some of these ideas, that's when we might start seeing some code examples. But I want to reiterate that this doesn't mean the ideas don't apply to low code. You may be able to implement some of these right now with the tools you have available. Let's look at one example. If you take one thing away from my presentation, it should be this. The concepts behind the best practice are more important than the code itself. And you don't necessarily need to know code to understand these ideas. Here, we have an example of a technical best practice. I'm going to pick on my friend Nikolai, who's a solutions architect here at Sauce Labs, and runs this amazing website called Ultimate QA. Please check it out, and if you ever have a chance to watch him speak, do so. One of the examples that Nikolai gives is that we should abstract implementation logic from the test so we can focus only on the scenario. That makes a lot of sense since the implementation, or the parts of our script that set things up, might change more frequently than the outcome or scenario that we're testing for. Below this statement, we see some code that looks like login steps for a test, and then some code of an elegant test where the steps are condensed into one method, leaving us with just 3 steps: opening the page, logging in, and looking for an error message, instead of the login taking up the most part of the test. Now, the majority of the world's population, including myself, would have stopped reading or listening to me when I said the word abstraction. There's even a good chance that this best practice might get skipped over entirely once we open the page and saw all that code. But instead of doing that today, we're going to look at this example more closely and remind ourselves that the best practice isn't the code, it's the idea behind it. Let's think about what's really being asked here. Can a low-code user distinguish between parts of the test that just set the test up and the actual test? Yeah, of course. Of course they can. We know which parts of the test get repeated over and over and which parts are unique. How about this question? Can a low-code user rewrite a test so that their energy is focused on the unique and important parts of the test? Maybe. Let's think about the tools we have to eliminate some of the repetitive work and maintenance. Most low-touch tools have the ability to create loops or flows. We can write a flow that captures or encapsulates the setup part of our test. This will leave just the unique part exposed, and as a bonus, our flow can be maintained easily. Now, you might be thinking, Evelyn, every low-code tester knows to write a loop or a flow to save time. Sure, you're right. I get it. This is a very basic example. The point is that low-code testers have this best practice in common with high-code testers. We just explain them differently, but under the surface, we share the same ideas. There are 1,000 opinions out there on the internet about how to write the best automation. There's even opinions out there that contradict some of the best practices I used as examples today. My call to action to you is to not limit yourself to the blogs or websites that say low code or just the ones that mention your low code solution. You might find great ideas out there on how to improve your testing in places you don't expect. So just as a refresher, let's take a look at how I propose we adopt high-code best practices for low-code testing. Step number 1, recognize yourself as a test automator. You are now part of a long history and tradition of arguing about the best way to automate tests. There's already so much information out there to help you reach your goals much, much faster. Number 2, remember that the concepts are more important than the code. Ask yourself what the author is really trying to get you to think about. Number 3, know your tool's functionality and roadmap so you can creatively adopt those new ideas. And finally, number 4, just apply what you can. You might not be able to adapt every best practice from high code, but the tools you have right now might just do the trick. I'd like to send out a few acknowledgements, mainly to the Solutions Architect team here at Sauce Labs and Nikolai, as well as Hannah, Josh Grant, Krishna, Sar and Marcus, who all helped me rehearse my presentation today, and you, the audience. I'm going to stick around for a Q&A, and I hope that you enjoyed my presentation.